Hello everyone, welcome to our channel, Draft and Revise. For today, we will discuss the nature of a quantitative research. But for the meantime, let's have this question first. When we are dealing with research, which comes first? Is it the question or the answer? Parang usapang ano ang mas nauna, itlog o ang manok? So in our case, which comes first? Is it the question or the answer? Okay, to give a clear context of that, let's have the quote or definition of Kerlinger, 1973, that research is searching for answer to question. So for that quote, for that definition of research, it seems to be that the answer comes first, okay, before the question. You're seeking first for the answer before you question or even you ask, before you ask. Paano ba yun? So in research, the answer that we are referring there is the related literature and related studies. Okay? So now your purpose as a researcher is because of there are lots of related literatures and studies out there. Your purpose now as a researcher is to look, identify, justify, verify which among those related literature and studies are saying the truth depending on your own result or investigation. Okay? Alright. But you know what, my students or future researchers, young researchers, the definition of Kerlinger in 1973 doesn't mean or doesn't equate the perception of the other. Okay? So it's a matter of how we're going to defend an idea that you believe in. Diba? Don't be passive. Don't just simply accept the facts that are being fed to you. Okay? You need to ask. You need to be skeptical and not just passive. Tanggap lang ng tanggap. Okay? Alright. So let's proceed. So like what I've said, okay, since you are in grade 12, you are now dealing with a quantitative study. Okay? Unlike when you were in grade 11, you are more focused on a qualitative study. So for our today's agenda, we will identify the following or discuss the following characteristics, strengths, and weaknesses, plus the kinds of a quantitative research. Okay, let's do this. When we say characteristics, we are actually referring to the features. Okay? Ang dami. There are lots of characteristics of quantitative research. Tignan nyo man, i-search nyo Google. Okay? But for me, I filtered them out into three. The first one is a quantitative research must contain a measurable variables followed by a standardized instrument and presents a numerical data. So let's have an example here to have a clear context of the following characteristics. On the measurable variables, we can easily measure the age, diba? The economical status, you just have to identify the financial income of the family or even you. Or the grade, the academic performance, right? But what if a variable is a concept? For example, beautiful. How can you say someone that he or she is magandang babae or magandang lalaki? Can we actually measure that? Is beauty measurable? Hmm? What is your pamantayan na that babae or lalaki is maganda? Okay, some of you might answer, maganda siya kasi mabuti siyang tao. Maganda siya kasi matangkad siya. Maganda siya kasi maputi siya and all and the like. Okay? We have different views and perception about the context of maganda. But the following follow-up question for that is, kung ang maganda sa kanya ay ganito at ang maganda sa iyo ay ganito naman, sino ang nagsasabi ng totoo? Sino ang tunay na maganda? Okay. Parang yung ganito sa Facebook yan eh. Yung nagsi-circulate na dun sa isang side nakikita niyang number is number 6. But the other side seeing it as number 9. Tama? So sino ngayon nagsasabi sa kanila ng totoo? Ano ba talaga yung number na yun? Is it 6 or is it 9? No? It seems goes to our question. Kung ang maganda sa iyo ay ganito at maganda sa kanya ay ganon, alin o sino ang tunay na maganda? Okay, share it. That is why the second characteristic of a quantitative research must utilize a standardized instrument because this instrument is a tool to break down, to justify, okay, kung sino yung maganda. Kasi meron na tayong criteria. We have now the basis. That is why make sure that your instrument is reliable and valid. Okay? To maintain objectivity of the study. Ang daming maganda. Example, Miss Universe, parang lahat sila deserving manalo because they are all pretty. Right? Pero, sino yung dapat manalo? We have now the criteria, the instrument that being used to justify it. Alright? And then the last characteristic of a quantitative research is it presents numerical data. Definitely. Diba? When you conduct a survey, you conduct a study, you need to present your data. And in quantitative research, you have to present your data numerically. Okay? Pag hindi kasi numerical yan, it's qualitative. Okay? Alright. So, to better understand further the characteristics of a quantitative research, let's have, okay, the difference between or the comparison between quantitative and a qualitative research. Okay. Gone are the days of providing superficial differences between the two research designs. By the way, the two research designs are the quantitative and the qualitative. No more and no less. Okay? Alright. So, hindi natin sasabihin na quantitative deals with numerical data and qualitative is the exact opposite, wherein it highlights or studies the non-numerical data. Diba? Tapos na yun. You are in grade 12, so you need to have a deeper perception about it. Okay? Let's have this first. The difference according to RLNRS. Just for you know, my dear students, a qualitative study, a study that you conducted last school year, okay, it showcases a blank spot. When we see blank spot, okay, the related literature or related studies are limited. Time will come, some of you might say, Ma'am Kang, we look, okay, we look further and really further. We almost reach the end. Okay? We go to a lot of sites and we even visited libraries. Yet, okay, we only have limited number of related literatures. Literature rather. Wala kasing plural form in literature. Okay, I understand. That's normal. Maybe because you are conducting a qualitative study wherein understudied yung study. Or baka ikaw pa lang yung unang gagawa. Okay, for example, last year, by year 2019, sige, para mas specific tayo, wala namang bata, okay, na nag-conduct ng study about online classes. Tama? That is understudied. Diba? The efficacy, the effectiveness of online classes in times of pandemic. Walang gagawa nun. Understudied siya. But because, okay, we are utilizing it, we are executing it, ang daming gumawa ng study. Ang dami nang gumagawa ng ganitong study. So meaning to say, there will be a time that a qualitative study can be converted or diverted into a quantitative study. Wherein in quantitative study, it generates a blind spot wherein there are lots of RLNRs out there. So your purpose now as a researcher is to accept or reject, okay, those RLNRs based on the findings of your own study. Clear? All right. Next one, we have the difference between or according to hypothesis. Okay, so we have the qualitative research. In qualitative, there is no need for hypothesis. Why? Why? Because the study is understudied. Or wala ka pang madodraw na conclusion or hypothesis or uneducated guess. Because you need to immerse yourself first on a situation that you are studying before you come up with your hypothesis. Alright? Unlike in quantitative, because of the availability of RLNRs, you can now come up or draw a conclusion or hypothesis. So now, you're going to conduct a study to determine if you're going to accept or reject that hypothesis of yours. Alright? Okay. So next one, difference according to instrument. When we say instrument, we are referring to the tool, okay, for you to be able to gather your data. It can be a poll, a survey, a test, or a checklist, an observation, etc. Okay? In qualitative, mga anak, it utilizes an open-ended questions. That is why it is subjective in nature. At ang sarap nitong aralin. What do you mean by open-ended question? Okay, kasi exact opposite naman yan is the quantitative study wherein it utilizes a closed-ended questions or objective in nature. It's so easy to identify and differentiate. In quantitative, the questions are fixed, arranged, okay, prior. At the same time, the answers can be a multiple choice or you just have to choose. Okay, as simple as that. It's very objective in nature. Unlike in qualitative, it's obvious naman, it's open-ended. So the questions, okay, are also what do you call this, prepared prior the data gathering, but you can come up with a follow-up question for the justification of the answer. Diba? Pwede ka pang mag-dig deeper. Bakit ganito yung sagot mo? Can you explain it further? Pwede mag-follow up. Kaya siya subjective in nature. Kaya ang sarap gumawa ng qualitative study. Kasi you'll be immersing yourself. Makikipag-usap ka talaga sa mga respondents mo. Okay? Alright. So next one, we have the difference according to statistical treatment. Definitely, in quantitative, since you are dealing with numerical data, so you'll be needing statistical operations or formula to be able to treat your data. Okay, to have your interpretation and presentation of your gathered data. But unlike the qualitative, you are dealing with non-numerical data such as diary, in-depth interview, documents, focus group discussion, a study, and all. Diba? Magta-transcribe kayo. I-encode mo, i-input mo the information that you have gathered from your respondents. Okay? Hindi mo naman pwedeng i-compute yung words. Yes, you can measure them kung ilan yung words nang ginamit, but it is not the proper interpretation of data. Okay? All right. So last one is difference according to presentation of data. In quantitative, you'll be needing tables, graphs, infographics, okay, to express your data. Unlike in qualitative, more likely tables lang to mga anak. Okay? Kaya lang dito, hindi present ang numbers. Text lang. Okay? Kaya napakahaba or napakakapal ng isang qualitative study. Sa sagot pa lang ng respondents, lalo na pag malalaman yung mga sagot, haba talaga yung paper ninyo. At matrabaho siya, anak. Can you imagine in a quantitative study, kung ano yung table, you just have to simply interpret it. Example, if 10 is being the highest and 2 is the lowest, as simple as that. Diba? Kung ano yung nasa graph, yun yung nasa interpretation. Unlike in qualitative, you have to have a diverse vocabulary bank. Okay? Kasi what's with your table, which are the answers of your respondents, you have to interpret them on your own words. Okay? Yun lang. So now let's move on to the strengths and weaknesses of quantitative research. We have this saying, or we have this quote, that the source of your strength, okay, is also the source of your weakness, which I think also applies in the strengths and weaknesses of a quantitative research. Let's have this. Ta-da! There are lots of strengths you can find, okay, online about quantitative research, but I narrowed them down into three, wherein one of the strengths of a quantitative research is it's reliable. Reliable because of the objectivity of the questions, diba? Since you are observing and utilizing a standardized instrument, meaning to say, the questions and even the answers are already fixed. So your function now as a researcher is to simply gather data from your respondents and see to it that they will going to answer it appropriately and honestly. Diba? As simple as that. And it is feasible because of the short time frame for administering the survey. Diba? So if the question is available and fixed, and even the question and even the answer, so it is really possible, okay, to accomplish your study in a short period of time. Okay? All right. And then lastly, it is effortless to interpret data. Like what I've said, you just have to come up with a table, and then you just have to interpret it based on what you observe from the table. Okay, now take a look at on the weaknesses of a quantitative research, which actually the exact opposite. Imagine, okay, these are the weaknesses and these are the strengths. What have you noticed? Kung ano yung strength, ganun din ang weakness. Okay. Number one, no human perception and beliefs. Kasi nga, you need to observe the objectivity of the questions. So there's no need for the follow-up questions and determine the perceptions or the sides of the respondents why they ended up with that answer. Okay? And so there is no depth immersion. Walang immersion, no. Walang nangyaring experiencing what the respondents is dealing with. Okay? All right. And then lastly, less text because of the tables and graphs. So what have we also noticed? The strengths of a quantitative research is characteristics of a quantitative research. And the weaknesses of a quantitative research is actually the characteristics of a qualitative research. Diba? Yes. So now I think we can now proceed to the kinds of quantitative research. And I want you to listen here attentively. Because if you just miss one idea, one part, domino reaction na yan. Magkaka-chain reaction na. Damay-damay na lahat. So you need to listen. Alright? Okay. So apat lang naman to. Okay? Hindi kayo ma-stress. I swear. Okay? So now we have the first kind of what do you call this, quantitative research. We have the descriptive. From the word itself, you just have to describe. There's no need for the comparison, finding the similarities and the like. You just simply have to describe. And to be able to describe, you need to observe definitely. So in describing, you are just answering the question what, okay? And the variable here, okay, is not being controlled. Okay? Let's have an example. Students study habits in online learning scheme. So we have here two variables. Okay, the first one is the student study habits, and the second one is the online learning scheme. Okay, to make it more specific, online learning scheme is our independent variable, and the dependent variable will be the student study habits. So if you're going to draw a conceptual framework for this, it looks like this. Okay, two boxes, left and right. So from the left part, you just have to input, okay, your independent variable. And then on the second box to the right, on the right rather, is your dependent variable, which is the student study habits. So since we are simply describing your two variables, yan lang. A straight line is a must. Okay, later on kasi magkakaroon tayo ng single arrow or dual arrow. So malaki ang pagkakaiba nun, mga anak. So you need to listen. Okay, as simple as that. But I have a question. What if, okay, what if the research title goes like this, okay? A comparative analysis between the student study habits in online and face-to-face learning scheme. Do you think, mga anak, do you think it is still a descriptive type or kind of quantitative research? Again, I repeat, the research title goes like this: a comparative analysis between the student study habits in online and face-to-face learning scheme. Do you think it's still descriptive? Yes, it is. Okay? Ma'am, bakit? Paano? Because if we're going to draw another conceptual framework for that, tada! So, naging dalawa na yung boxes dun sa left side rather. The online and face-to-face. So, nagkaroon ba ng comparison? Wala naman eh. You just have to, what? Describe the study habits of the students in online and face-to-face. Hindi mo naman sasabihin saan sila mas productive, saan sila mas nag-aaral, saan mas maayos saan sila mas maayos mag-aral, sa online ba or sa face-to-face. Walang ganun. Okay? Alright. So now let's have the second kind. We have now the correlational. If in descriptive you are simply observing and describing, in correlational, you need to observe also observe, but this time around, you'll be observing the relationships among your variables. And again, the variables here are not controlled. Okay, let's have the example here. The relationship between the level of subject mastery and frequency of activity avoidance. Okay, so ganito. Meron kasing existing na study na ang sinasabi, ang naging findings is ganito. The more daw yung bata ay namamaster or gumagaling sa isang subject, the more daw siya na, what do you call this? Nagiging tamad, okay? Or hindi niya masyadong gaano pinapansin yung mga activities because he or she has this thinking na, alam ko naman eh, gets ko naman na. Okay? And also the findings, okay? The more yung bata na nahihirapan dun sa subject, hindi siya nag-excel, the more na sinisipagan niya na magpasa, gumawa ng mga activities for him or her master the subject. At the same time, makabawi. Kasi nga, medyo alanganin siya or tagilid siya dun sa subject na yun. Okay? So now we're referring to a relationship. And if you're going to draw a conceptual framework for that, ganito yung itsura niya. Tada! Anong nabago? We still have the two boxes to signal the independent and dependent variable. But this time around, we are what? Having a one-way arrow pointing the left, which is the dependent variable. Anak, one way lang ha. Kumbaga sa love story, one-sided lang. Okay? Alright. So, bigay tayo ng example dun kanina sa descriptive. So, descriptive, medyo questionable siya, di ba? Parang ang daming galit sa current government natin, specifically the Duterte administration. Pero bakit ang taas-taas pa rin ng trust rating niya? So, ang ginawa lang sa study na yun, anak, is descriptive. Dinescribe lang yung trust rating. Tama? So, walang kinalaman doon kung first year of, ano ba yun, ng termino niya, pangalawang taon na, during ba, or before pandemic. Wala kasi tayong tinitignan noon na relationship. Okay? Alright. So now let's have the next kinds of the quantitative research. We have the quasi-experimental. So this time around, anak, we are not just simply observing, describing, and finding the relationship or knowing the relationship. We are also looking for the cause and effect relationship. So if we're going to draw a conceptual framework for this, since we are dealing with now to cause and effect, ganito na siya. Okay? What have you noticed? Yes, it is now a dual arrow. Diba? So let's have the example for you to have a clearer understanding on quasi-experimental. Okay. The efficacy of instructional modules in basic calculus on students' engagement. Let's first identify the two variables here. The first variable, efficacy of instructional module. Okay, in basic calculus. And the other one is the student's engagement. So our independent variable here now is the instructional modules in basic calculus. And the dependent variable is the student's engagement. So paano siya naging quasi? Tingnan natin. If you just simply, determining kung what do you call this? Kung may relationship, si module sa student's engagement, correlational lang yun. Ngayon, papaano siya ngayon magiging quasi-experimental? Okay, let's have this. Kasi nga, two-way siya, di ba? So now, napatunayan natin na mababa, let's say, mababa yung naging student's engagement, participation ng bata in answering his or her module. Napatunayan natin yun, okay? That is correlational. Pero, since napatunayan na natin siya, babalikan natin ulit, okay? Babalikan natin ulit yung independent variable, okay? Ayusin natin yung part na kung saan mababa yung engagement ng bata. And then, ibabalik ulit yun sa respondent. At kapag napatunayan, okay, na halimbawa, mababa pa rin yung engagement ng bata, baka walang problema sa module. Baka talagang yung bata hindi nag-excel sa subject na yun. Okay? So, kung pwede naman, possible naman, kapag kabalik nung revised module is nagtumaas yung engagement ng bata. Therefore, yung module na yung naging problema. Okay? That is why in quasi-experimental, mas mabusisi siya at mas time-consuming siya. Okay? Alright. So, the last one, balikan ko lang mga anak. In the quasi-experimental, yung independent variable is being controlled now. Okay? To see the efficacy or the causality of your two variables. Alright? Okay. But for our next and last type or kind of a quantitative research, gamit na gamit to sa STEM strand, lalo na kung scientific yung study. Okay, parehas din mga anak. It tests the causality, the cause and effect relationship. But this time around, mga anak, the dependent and independent variable, dalawa na yung kinokontrol. Okay, so let's have this example. The efficacy of modified instructional modules. Anak, modified na to. Ibig sabihin, nagkaroon na ng intervention. Okay, nagkaroon na ng controlling. And then, what you call this dependent variable is the student's engagement. Ma'am, parang wala naman nagbago. Paano po dyan mapapatunayan na nagkaroon din ng control yung researcher on the dependent variable? Okay, relax. Baka hindi kasi siya evidence sa title. But if you're going to read the paper, the entire paper, may nabago. Okay, are you familiar with the context of a controlled and experimental group? Okay, sige. Let's have an example. Assuming a Filipino invented or discovered a vaccine that can cure 100% the COVID-19. The COVID-19 tuloy. The coronavirus, I mean. Okay? Kung gusto niyang matest yun, kung talagang 100% siya, so kukuha ngayon siya ng kanyang respondents. Okay? So, yung experimental group, naka-receive ng vaccine. Okay? And the other group, which is the control group, wala. Okay? Assuming mga anak, na doon sa experimental group, okay, sa experimental group, na-expose sila sa virus, pero hindi sila tinablan, therefore, effective nga yung vaccine. Pero doon sa control group, dahil na-expose sila, pero siguro naman wala namang gagawa ng ganun. No? Na-expose sila sa virus, ayun, nagkaroon sila ng infection. So that is experimental. Because you have what? You have controlled your dependent variable, not just your independent variable. Okay? All right. Pero may follow-up pa nga doon eh. Halimbawa, doon sa experimental group, may na-infect tsaka walang na-infect. So ngayon, para maging causality siya, the relationship, para mag-appear siya, titignan ulit ngayon ng scientist na yun, a Filipino scientist, kung saang aspect, okay, hindi naging effective sa iba. Okay, yung vaccine. Okay. Did you get now the point? Yes. So with that, kung mag-drawing tayo ng ating conceptual framework, same also with the quasi-experimental. Dual arrow pa rin. So thank you for attending our class today. Hopefully you have learned a lot today. Thank you.